What if your loved one's brutal murder remained unsolved for decades, leaving only silence and unanswered questions? Imagine the pain, the frustration, and the endless wondering. Who took their life? Why did they deserve to die? Will justice ever be served? For one family, this nightmare became reality. 41 years ago, a young life full of promise and beauty was tragically cut short. The investigation went cold, but the memories, the grief, and the longing for answers never faded. Laura Kempton, a lively, ambitious, and welcoming beauty school student, had her whole life ahead of her. But on that fateful day in 1981, her future was brutally stolen. Her family was left shattered, searching for clues that seemed to vanish into thin air. So are you ready to study Laura's incredibly heartbreaking story? A life cut short, a family left with unanswered questions, and a search for justice that's lasted decades. Will she finally get the justice she deserves? Let's get right into the truth about Laura's fate together. Before moving forward, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Suppose you are looking for a young woman with a spark in her eyes, ready to take on the world. That was Laura, a 23-year-old with a passion for life and a heart full of dreams. She had a way of lighting up the room with her bright smile and infectious laugh. In 1980, Laura ditched her small town and moved to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. She was so over the familiar routine and ready to mix things up. The city's energy was electric, promising her a fresh start and endless possibilities. Laura felt a rush of freedom, as if she could finally be herself. The city's clubs and music scene were like a magnet, drawing her in with their excitement and vibe. Laura was a beauty school student by day and a social butterfly by night. She worked at Karen's Ice Cream, scooping sundaes for summer tourists, and at Macro Polo, a quirky gift shop on Market Street. Her goal was to become a hairdresser, and she was just months away from achieving it. She was determined to make a name for herself in the city. And that's precisely what she did. By day, she honed her hairdressing skills. By night, she connected with the community through her love of life that was dancing. Despite her loving dance and music, Laura refuses to let the city's tough side break her. She had a dream and a purpose. She found comfort in her work and her passions. Laura felt like she was making a difference with every Sunday she scooped and every haircut she styled. She was connecting people and making the city a better place, and no matter what challenges, Laura knew she'd overcome them and shine even brighter. As she loved to dance, laugh, and live in the moment, she frequented popular hotspots like the Ranger Club in Riverside, always surrounded by friends and admirers. Her social calendar was always full, and she wouldn't have it any other way. While Laura wasn't committed to a single partner, she was involved with a man named Charlie, who happened to be the talented saxophonist for a band that regularly performed at Luca's, a popular local dining establishment. Their relationship was developing, and Laura was excited to see where it would go. Laura's future was bright, and her possibilities seemed endless. She was a young woman with a heart full of hope and a spirit that couldn't be tamed. But little did she know, her life was about to take a devastating turn. A turn that would leave her family, friends, and community shattered. A turn that would become one of the most infamous crimes in Portsmouth's history. September 28, 1981 was a night that Laura's friends would never forget. It started like any other Saturday night with Laura and her friends dancing at the Riverside Club. The music was pumping and the lights were flashing all around them. That's where Laura first spotted JR, a guy with a smile that could light up a room. As they danced together, Laura and JR became more drawn to each other with every song played. By the night's end, they were back at Laura's place, laughing and talking until the early morning hours. Laura really liked JR, so she asked him to stay over, and he happily agreed. They stayed up late, sharing stories and making each other laugh until they couldn't open their eyes. The following day, they grabbed a quick bite to eat breakfast at Goldie's Deli. still smiling and joking around with each other. But Laura had to rush off to work at Macro Polo, a job she really enjoyed. Her friends noticed how excited she seemed that morning, buzzing with energy as she headed out the door. During her lunch break at Café Petronella, Laura's mind was filled with thoughts of JR. She couldn't wait to see him again after work. They had something special, and she couldn't stop smiling just thinking about it. Later that evening, Laura met up with her friend Karen, and they decided to hit up Luca's, a lively spot on Hanover Street known for its great music and dancing. They had a blast together, dancing like nobody was watching and laughing until their sides hurt. Several guys tried to catch Laura's eye, but she was only interested in having fun with Karen and soaking up the music. As the night ended, Karen hugged Laura goodbye at 1 a.m. on the steps of 20 Chapel Street. Little did they know, danger crept around nearby. Across Sheaf Street, a curious 13-year-old boy named R.S. wandered out of his bedroom to use the bathroom. As he passed through the living room, his eyes landed on his mother, still awake and sitting in the dimly lit space. But R.S.'s attention was drawn to something else. The living room window, which offered a perfect view of the first-floor unit across the street. He had grown accustomed to catching glimpses of the beautiful young woman who had moved in that summer, and there she was, sitting on her couch, her back to the window. R.S. could see the gentle curve of her shoulder blades and the outline of something in her hand, perhaps a snack, like a cookie or cracker. Little did R.S. know this brief moment would be one of the last times anyone would see Laura Kempton alive. It was a chance glimpse, a short snapshot of a life about to take a tragic turn. The night that had begun with so much joy and laughter was about to turn into a tragedy that would haunt everyone who knew Laura. Just hours later, Officer Ron Gravoy walked through downtown Portsmouth on a crisp Monday mid-morning, September 28, 1981. He knew these brick sidewalks like the back of his hand. His destination was 20 Chapel Street, where a young woman had neglected to pay for her parking tickets. As he approached the building, he noticed the front door was unlocked. He headed to unit number 2, where he found a broken door with a missing panel. Peering inside, he saw a messy pile of bedding and a pair of legs bound at the ankles with a white cord. Something was terribly wrong. Gravois backed away, his mind racing. He scanned the hallway and stairwell but found nothing out of the ordinary. Satisfied the scene was secure, he radioed for backup, his routine call now a sinister discovery. By mid-morning on the 29th, 9:25 a.m., a crowd had gathered outside 20 Chapel Street, blocked by crime scene tape. News of Officer Gravois' shocking discovery spread like wildfire. Lead investigator William Mortimer, a seasoned detective with years of experience in the Portsmouth Police Department, was already at the scene. He took in the disturbing sight before him. Laura's body was almost entirely hidden under a pile of bedding, mattress, and box springs. Only her legs from the knees down were visible, bound by a white cord from an electric blanket. A large blood stain had soaked into the rug beneath her. Mortimer looked around the room and saw signs of a fierce struggle. Blood was splattered on the walls, closets and drawers were ransacked, and Laura's belongings were scattered everywhere. It was a chaotic and gruesome scene, and Mortimer knew he had a tough case ahead of him. As Mortimer continued to survey the scene, his team carefully lifted the mattress and blankets, revealing a sight that made his blood run cold. Laura lay exposed, her body battered and bruised, with a gray telephone cord strangling her neck and a green pillowcase shrouding her face. With a gentle touch, Mortimer removed the pillowcase and his heart sank. Laura's face was a mess of purple bruises and swelling, her features barely recognizable. The medical examiner would later confirm that she had endured a savage beating, with blows so brutal they had nearly crushed her skull. But that wasn't all. Beside her lifeless body lay a wine bottle, its presence seeming to mock Mortimer with its innocence. And then there was the cigarette butt, carelessly discarded on the floor, a stark contrast to Laura's non-smoking habits. The killer's presence seemed to remain, taunting Mortimer with clues and questions. Who was this person? What had driven them to such unspeakable violence? This wasn't over. There were tons of questions peeking around the window. Who took Laura's life? Who was with her in her final moments? What did she suffer before she died? Who will bring justice for Laura? After Laura's body was transferred to a gurney, Mortimer and his team discovered a crucial piece of evidence, a small, black metal hook torn from the mailbox in the hallway. This ordinary object, used for hanging keys, had been repurposed by the killer to gain entry. Mortimer realized that the perpetrator had used the hook to pry out the molding, allowing them to reach in and unlock the door. In a thorough search, investigators collected hundreds of potential evidence items, including 2 cords, a cigarette butt, a pillowcase covering Laura's head and neck. A glass wine bottle was found next to her body on the floor. They meticulously processed the apartment's interior and exterior for fingerprints and palm prints, yielding several matches, notably on the apartment door. A telephone inside the apartment. These findings could potentially hold crucial clues in exposing the mystery surrounding Laura's tragic death. Later that afternoon, Dr. Dennis Carlson, the medical examiner, conducted Laura's autopsy. His findings confirmed the devastating extent of her injuries, massive head trauma, and signs of sexual assault. Dr. Carlson collected vital evidence, including vaginal swabs, skin scrapings from Laura's upper left thigh, and swabs from the telephone cord around her neck. The investigation had just started, and Mortimer was determined to figure out what happened to Laura in her final moments. He wanted to piece together the clues and find out who was responsible for her death. Mortimer assigned a team of detectives and officers to question Laura's friends, family, co-workers, and schoolmates, essentially anyone who might have interacted with her shortly before her death. From these interviews, a portrait emerged of Laura as a joyful, outgoing young woman with an exciting social life. It was difficult to imagine anyone wanting to harm her. The police were particularly interested in speaking with J.R. due to his recent romantic involvement with Laura. He confirmed that they had sex in the early hours of Sunday, September 27th, and again later that morning before heading out for breakfast. Despite having showered afterward, J.R. acknowledged that his semen might be among the samples collected from Laura's body. He noted that Laura had no visible bruises or cuts during their time together, and provided some intriguing details about her habits. 1. Laura was meticulous about locking her apartment door, including when they briefly left to get a snack. Before bed around 3 a.m. on Sunday, she asked J.R. to double-check that the front door was secured. 2. Additionally, J.R. observed that Laura placed a wad of cash into a plain envelope on her kitchen table as they prepared to leave in the morning. She didn't specify the money, but it might have been for a utility or rent payment. The envelope and its contents were later discovered missing, presumably taken by the perpetrator. Laura's neighbors provided further insights into the events that transpired after Karen left her in the early hours of Monday morning. R.S. and his mother, who lived across the street, saw Laura in her sitting room around 1:30 a.m. About half an hour later, Daniel Fortier, a resident of Laura's building, returned home and noticed the hallway light on the ground floor was out. He observed a missing wooden panel on Laura's door and heard noises from inside her apartment, leading him to suspect someone was repairing the door, possibly after a break-in. It was later determined that the hallway light bulb had likely been deliberately loosened. If Daniel's timing was accurate, the noises he heard were probably made by Laura's killer. Dr. Carlson collected vital samples from Laura's body, including vaginal swabs and smears and skin scrapings from her upper thigh. These were sent to the New Hampshire State Forensic Lab for analysis. Although DNA testing was not yet available, 4 years before its potential in criminal investigations was discovered, the lab could still determine blood types from the samples. The results revealed the blood on the wine bottle was type A, matching Laura's, indicating it was likely used in the crime. Type A blood was also found on the door molding and pillowcase. The telephone cord showed traces of seminal fluid, and sperm was present in the vaginal smears and skin scrapings. These findings would prove crucial 42 years later in solving the case. In a chilling coincidence, just a few months later, on October 19, 1982, another student from Portsmouth Beauty School, Tammy Little, was found murdered in her apartment with similar injuries. Many suspected a connection between the two crimes, sparking fears of a serial killer. There are some connections between the two cases. Both victims were in their early 20s, single, and lived alone in ground-floor apartments. Both addresses were about a mile apart. Both women had recently moved in, a few months before their deaths. Both were regulars at the same local night spots and ran in the same social circles. Both were killed in the fall, in the early morning hours after a night out with friends. Both had suffered massive head injuries. Both had disfiguring facial injuries. Both attended Portsmouth Beauty School. Both had done modeling gigs for local photographers. Despite these connections, Detective Mortimer was cautious not to link the cases prematurely without solid evidence. By September 25, 1985, the homicides of Laura Kempton and Tammy Little remained unsolved. Despite suspicions surrounding men who had been seen with the victims or were acquaintances, investigators couldn't gather enough evidence to make an arrest. Portsmouth Police Captain George Crook assured the public that both cases were still active investigations. Assistant Attorney General Brian Tucker acknowledged the frustration of having a prime suspect, but lacked the evidence to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Tucker emphasized that investigators must be confident in their case before proceeding. Ironically, 1985 was the same year Alec Jeffreys, a pioneering scientist, used genetic fingerprinting to solve a double murder in England. However, this technology wouldn't be considered in U.S. investigations for over a decade. New Hampshire wouldn't establish its own DNA testing lab until 2002, hindering the progress of cases like Kempton and Little's. In 2000, detectives submitted 2 DNA samples from Laura's case for testing at Cellmark Diagnostics in Maryland. The samples were from her thigh area and the telephone wire on her neck. Although they couldn't develop a DNA profile from the wire, they obtained a partial male DNA profile from the thigh sample. 2 years later, in 2002, the Portsmouth Police sent additional evidence to the Maine State Crime Lab for testing. Forensic analyst Kathy McMillan developed 2 DNA profiles from the vaginal swab, one belonging to Laura and an unknown male. The cigarette butt found near Laura's body yielded a partial male profile matching the vaginal swab. Notably, this profile also matched the partial profile from the thigh scrapings obtained earlier. The investigation took an unexpected turn when J.R., Laura's last known sexual partner, was tested and found not to match the DNA evidence. In fact, his DNA was not present on her body at all, despite their earlier sexual encounter. This led investigators to continue collecting comparison DNA samples and eliminate hundreds of persons of interest over the next decade. Launched in September 2021, a collaborative effort between the Portsmouth Police, New Hampshire State Crime Lab, and AG's office explored using genetic genealogy to crack cold cases, including Laura Kempton's. They re-engaged Identifinders International to reanalyze the vaginal swab samples. In May 2022, after 8 months, the lead investigator received news that the unknown male's DNA profile had been successfully obtained and matched to a close relative in the GED Match database. Genetic genealogist Linda Doyle quickly identified the unknown male as the offspring of 2 specific individuals who had only one biological child. Although the child had passed away nearly 20 years prior, the lead detective obtained a blood card from the autopsy and sent it to the Maine State Crime Lab for comparison. The DNA on the blood card perfectly matched the vaginal swab from Laura, confirming the identity of the killer, Ronnie James Lee. After over 42 years, authorities finally had a name to associate with the faceless suspect. Ronnie James Lee was born in Fort Myers on January 16, 1960. His obituary lists his parents as Charlie James Lee and Janie Mae, though it's uncertain if they were both his biological parents. Ronnie was the third of Charlie and Janie Mae's 6 children. His parents divorced during his childhood. Details about Ronnie's early years are sparse, but he enlisted in the Army as a teenager in the late 1970s and served until May 15, 1981. By then, he lived with his mother on Rock Hill Avenue in Portsmouth's North End, just an 8-minute drive or 40-minute walk from Old Harbor, where Laura Kempton lived. In June 1981, Ronnie started working as a security guard for the Liberty Mutual building in Portsmouth, though MBI Security employed him. This coincided with Laura moving into her apartment on Chapel Street. In September 1981, Ronnie broke into Laura's apartment and murdered her, but managed to evade capture by law enforcement. Ronnie's interactions with the Portsmouth Police Department became significant in November 1982 when he was arrested for attempted burglary. The following summer, he went on a burglary spree, breaking into 4 homes and 1 business in the city. One of these burglaries involved breaking a window pane and unlocking it from the inside, reminiscent of his break-in at Laura's apartment. In 1987, Ronnie was convicted of burglary and sexual assault in Keene, New Hampshire. A young woman at home during the robbery woke around 3:30 a.m. to find someone touching her. She opened her eyes to see Ronnie standing over her. She screamed, waking her roommate, and Ronnie fled with stolen cash and jewelry. He was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison from 1987 to 1990. Ronnie's life ended in 2005 when he died from a cocaine overdose at the age of 45. He left behind a son, several step-siblings, and a legacy of crime that remained top secret for nearly 2 decades after his death. After decades of investigation, the 1981 homicide case of Laura Kempton has finally been solved. On a sunny afternoon in late July, law enforcement officials gathered at the State Police Communications Center in Concord to announce the breakthrough. New Hampshire Attorney General John Formella named Ronnie James Lee as Laura's killer. Lee, who would have been 63 years old if he were alive today, would have faced charges of first-degree murder, aggravated sexual assault, battery, and robbery. Unfortunately, justice came too late, as Lee had passed away. The case had gone cold, but advancements in forensic science and the dedication of detectives kept the investigation alive. Police Commissioner William Mortimer, the first lead detective on the case, had expressed his confidence in solving the case before his passing in 2019. His faith in forensic science and his team has finally been vindicated. Laura Kempton's family was thankful for the police's hard work in solving the case. They appreciated the investigators' dedication and persistence in bringing justice to Laura and her loved ones. Now that Ronnie James Lee was named as Laura's killer, her family and loved ones could finally find some peace. Although it took a long time, justice was served. This case showed that persistence in seeking truth and justice are essential, no matter how long it takes. Meanwhile, evidence from Tammy Little's 1982 murder remains preserved, awaiting advances in science and genealogy to identify a suspect. Here is a question for you, and you must know the answer if you are a true crime stories lover. What is the most critical step in solving cold cases like Laura's? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, please like our channel and share it with true crime stories lovers.